I bet that at some point in your life, you've just done something that was good because it was good, and that was it. And you didn't think about anything else. You were just in the moment, and there was something in front of you, and something needed to be done, and you did it. My guess is that there has also been a time or two in your life where there were 1,000 opportunities to do good things in front of you. You only got so many hours in the day, though. And so you looked at a situation, you thought, I'm going to pick that one. And you did a thing that was genuinely good and genuinely helpful, but also there was some self-serving reason that you picked that one and not the other 999 opportunities. You could have done all the other stuff, and that would have been great. But this one good thing that was just as good for the recipient as any of the other things would have been also was strategic or valuable for the other things you were trying to accomplish. I think this is a pretty normal thought process that all people go through. I think this is kind of the root of how business negotiation, business dealings work. And I don't think just because there's some strategy to doing good things that undermines good things or vice versa. And I also think total altruism exists. If you can relate to that slightly understandably mixed motive kind of scenario that we all face from time to time, then I think you're going to be able to relate to Cyrus the Great. This is fantastically powerful Persian king in the 500s BC who we've been talking about. He worked his butt off and made a ton of good decisions to conquer the ancient world. And after he got done with that, he looks around, takes stock of things. He's like, dang, I got a lot to sort out here. I just inherited a bunch of cities, a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of territory. Also, I inherited a whole bunch of people groups. I have to figure out what I'm going to do with what. And the decision that we see him making in the Bible with one of those people groups, the one that's near and dear to our heart as we read through the Bible, is that he decides that he's going to reverse the policies of his predecessors, and he's going to let these conquered people groups like the Jews go home. And further, he's going to reverse the plundering of the wealth and the resources of these groups like the Jews and give money back to them so that they can actually build something worthwhile. He's going to reverse the coercion that was inflicted on these people groups like the Jews, and he's going to give them a certain degree of self-governance. Why would Cyrus do something like that? Well, on the one level, because as we've looked at in the Bible for the last couple of days, God ordained that this king, who probably thought he was totally autonomous, would not be totally autonomous, and that he would do the things that God would prompt him to do, at least in this case. And God decided in advance that Cyrus was going to let his people go. He would be the chosen instrument of God's blessing to and restoration of, that is, his people. But Cyrus had some stuff cooking in his brain too, like strategically, what's going on there? And I don't think it's that tough to figure out what he was gunning at. You remember a while back I was telling you about those little football-shaped Cyrus cylinders, that propaganda that he circulated around to help establish himself as the new king of this new empire. And in it, there are a couple of points that I think relate here. In one of those points, we learn that Cyrus was very adaptive religiously. We know from that Cyrus cylinder, I believe from Herodotus as well, that when he showed up in Babylon, he paid homage to the god of the Babylonians, Marduk. Well, Marduk wasn't the god of the Persians. The Persians worship Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda, who's the chief god of Zoroastrianism, doesn't have the same values exactly as Marduk. But there's a pretty elaborate religious ceremony that would go on every year in Babylon where the king would show up and would somehow interact with this bowl that's representative of Marduk. And Cyrus, even though that wasn't really his religion, he just jumped right in. Now, you go and read the stuff that Cyrus put down in this Cyrus cylinder, or read things about him, and you get the impression that it's PR, that he understands that local cultures and customs, they're built around these religious assumptions, and you're not going to understand or connect with the culture if you don't understand and connect with those religious assumptions. Also, you could look at all of this stuff and think, here's a guy doing the ultimate Pascal's wager where he's like, well, I I'm pretty sure Ahura Mazda is the one true God, but maybe there's more than one true God. Or maybe it's not Ahura Mazda and it's actually Marduk. And if I just frame my language carefully, I can hedge my bets a little bit and try to square up with all of these different gods that I'm encountering as I'm doing a little globe trotting and conquering here, and try to either be right with all of these gods if they do exist as much as possible by being nice to their people, or at least make nice with the people by making nice, that is, with their potentially imaginary God. So I don't think that Cyrus the Great was this magnificent pre-Christian, proto-Christian who just loved God with all of his heart and couldn't get enough of God. No, history tells us that he worshiped a lot of gods and he was very religiously flexible. What I do think is that the Bible holds out the God of the Bible as using that political pressure that forced Cyrus to behave in those ways to the advantage of his redemptive plan and in the service of the restoration of his people. And so what I see there is a very mixed set of motives on the part of Cyrus. On the one hand, how do you get your subjects to love you? I suppose one way is to demonstrate that with your arrival comes a new age of freedom and peace and prosperity, of respect for your religions and your autonomy. I mean, that's a fantastic way to do it. What's another great way to get your new subjects to love you? I mean, show up wearing the ball cap of the home team at one of their playoff games and be like, I got traded to the Denver Broncos last year, and guess what? I suddenly love the Denver Nuggets. Go Nugs. Is that the nickname of them? Well, then I think it. Go Nugs. And we all know when an athlete moves to our town, they're like, yeah, this is the best city ever. They got the best fans ever. And they're suddenly super excited about all of the other sports teams in town. Like, well, we know that's not genuine, but also we accept it, because we're not really all that sophisticated or all that much more clever than people in the ancient world. And likewise, I would have to think that most of the Jewish people in 538 BC weren't looking at Cyrus the Great and thinking, this guy is a theological giant who knows God better than any other. I mean, he kind of replaces Moses in our minds. This is the best follower of God ever. No, I think they could see what he was doing politically, but also I think they could appreciate what he was doing. And again, Cyrus wanted people to know that this was a new day and that he was going to be treating them differently. On that Cyrus cylinder, he very specifically says, I sought the welfare of the city of Babylon and all its sacred centers. Okay, see, he's for gods he theoretically doesn't even believe in or worship. As for the citizens of Babylon, I relieved their weariness and freed them from their service. Marduk, the great lord, rejoiced over my good deeds. Notice he isn't saying Ahura Mazda. Again, that's the god of the Persians, rejoiced over his good deeds. He's saying Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, is rejoicing over his good deeds. So I think it's interesting as we're getting a sense of this world and how the original audience felt about the relationship between God and the Persian Empire and the Persian kings and the return from exile and all of this stuff that was the big story of the day for them, and very much still the big story of the day when we get into the book of Esther. I think it's interesting to peel back little layers like this together and to try to imagine how the original audience, how the Jewish people would have really thought about what Cyrus had done for them. Obviously, they were going to be really high on it, but what would have been their various opinions about his motives and what went into it? Would they have looked at this and been like, dang, God pulled one over on Persia? Or would they have been like, oh, God stirred the heart of Nebuchadnezzar? You read about that in the book of Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar still, though, didn't come to such a point of bending the knee to God that he would do the right thing and let his people go. And as a result, God stripped Nebuchadnezzar's descendants of their kingdom and gave it over to someone who would have their heart softened by God and who would listen and who would take it all the way to its logical conclusion and let the people go home. Maybe there were some who viewed it that way. Maybe there were others who were like, look, we saw the stuff that Cyrus did on campaign before he finally went and attacked Babylon. Cyrus went out west into Greek territory and did some conquering. He went out way east and did some conquering. And there were a few people who he conquered. And he's like, you know what? I'm a nice conqueror and I want to have affinity with all of you. Keep worshiping your gods. You know what? Keep your governors. Just pay this tribute to me and we're going to be fine. And there's a couple of instances where then Cyrus turns around to go somewhere else and they immediately rebel. And then Cyrus comes back and absolutely crushes them and strips them of their autonomy. So maybe a lot of the Jews here are just thinking, look, God has worked this thing out and this is a really good deal for us. It doesn't matter what percentage motivation is a soft heart on the part of Cyrus made that way by God, and what percentage of his motivations is he's trying to get the empire to like him so he can buy time to get his feet underneath him. It doesn't matter what his motivations are. We know how he acts if we don't take the gracious offer he's giving us. So we need to be Cyrus's biggest fans. We got to do everything by the book and just be grateful for what we have going on here. Surely there are a whole bunch of mixed opinions. What I can say for sure, though, is that everybody who writes about Cyrus in the Bible, they really like him and they're very positive about him, both those writing about him before he's ever born, like what we see in Isaiah, and those who are writing about him looking backwards, as in the case of 2 Chronicles and on into Ezra. I just think it's so dang fascinating that the Bible story starts to come into full color as we get out of the really distant, ancient Bronze Age stuff and we get into this Persia stuff. We get enough outside sources to really know some of these characters who are overlapping with the Bible. And it takes this Old Testament story to a whole new level of depth and interactiveness. And I really enjoy thinking about that with you. Next time around, we're going to look at a few more things in the book of Ezra that tell us a bit more about how Cyrus's decree played out and how the rebuilding of Jerusalem went. And all of that stuff we're going to look at tomorrow, and all of this stuff we've been looking at with Cyrus today would have been fully in the minds of everybody who is participating in the story of the book of Esther and everybody who would have been reading the book of Esther. All right, I'm having fun. More on this tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.